left seems to be organising itself. We talk about the victory for a left candidate for the Democratic nomination in New York City with a programme that would probably make Jeremy Corbyn's heart sing. We speculate on why he hasn't said he will join the new left party being formed in England at the moment, and what's happening on the Scottish front. There is a group that's promising a meeting in October. It's not very clear whether it supports independence or not. We're talking still about the wider question of Palestine and the shameful decision by the SNP group at Westminster to abstain on the vote on Palestine Action and what's followed on that. And much more besides, including bits and bits about the Western Isles and the glorious bounciness of Greenlanders.
Those are the headlines. Now for the podcast.
Well, hi chums, and welcome to this week's Leslie Riddoch podcast. It's been a bumper week with the Labour government celebrating its first week in government. Woohoo! Said absolutely nobody. There were tears from the front bench and some shocking poll results. How has the week been for you, Leslie? I'm still in Greece pretending to relax by a pool, which I think possibly you can hear spilling over into the microphone with the dulcet tones of Queen and various people shouting and giggling and mixture of Danish and Germans.
Right. God, you are you are sounding like total misery, actually, you know. But I mean...
Well, it's been a lovely time. As they kept saying to my wishes, well, you could just lie by the pool and read your book. I says, yes, but what do you do on the second day?
I know, hyperactive man gets stuck in relaxed hell, basically.
Pretty much.
You were swimming. I was also swimming because I've made a little pond in the garden, and maddeningly it sprung leaks. And the proudest moment of my life was practically, seriously, that I managed to find the leak and fix it with some of this, butyl tape. And the maddening thing about it was when I started to look at it, there's a seam right the way through this, reasonably expensive butyl sheeting that you put down. And, a seam is a weak point and everything. And just all these little buttercup and all the other sort of wee stalks have pushed. So anyway, I fixed it. It stayed for a year. I thought, you actual dancer. And I showed everybody that came here, I fixed that pond. And they all went, oh my God, she's sad. So anyway, it then has just completely leaked again. And I mean, I can't tell you, it's just because I know there'll be lots of people listening that have got stuff like this in their garden and they just give up, So I just thought, right, what the hell? So I basically changed into a swimming costume yesterday, went in, because there wasn't much to get into apart from a base layer of mud, and pushed the sheeting up till I saw that the whole of that seam underneath at the bottom was full of holes where little bits of stuff had poked through. So basically I had to take all the stones off, took all the wee beasties out, took the water out with the wee beasties, took the plants out, took the stones out that were surrounding it, took the blinking sheeting out, hung it on the line, washed it, and I am now about to put the butyl lining across the whole of the seam. Now you can applaud if you want. Good, right. Well, you see, I think that.
Well, it's very impressive. It'd certainly be a lot colder than where I've been swimming, although even for me, I said this is a bit chilly when you jump in. It's 30 degrees in the sun, but certainly not 30 degrees in the pool.
But that's what the advantage of having been in the Western Isles is recently, because when I looked at this pond, I thought, how am I going to lean over and get all this? I thought, you've been in water like this. Because I went swimming 3 times when I was on the Western Isles, once in one of these lochs, that's got kind of lilies and stuff on it, which is kind of quite muddy on the bottom. So I thought, just think of it like that. You're just getting back into the pond you were in 2 days ago, basically. And that's what cracked it. So never mind the weather, etc.
Happy times. Much less happy times for the old Labour Party. They're getting kicked about from both the left and the right, and their continuous U-turns, as we said last week, which they keep making far too late to have made any impact to stave off the negative criticism, seems to be really whacking them. And there's been this more in common mega poll suggesting they're going to get flattened at the next election.
Indeed. I mean, every time we do a podcast, there's a whacking poll that just makes everything much, much worse than it was before. I mean, this one had 7,000 UK voters, so that's quite big, because often they just do 1,000 UK voters and then there'll be, potentially 100, yeah, right Scots. But I mean, the top line of this, if you haven't seen it already, is that 2/3 of Britons don't think Starmer respects people like them, and that's double where it was last year. So in 1 year, the number of people who think essentially Starmer disrespects them has doubled. Actually, voters think it's time for a change of government, and there's a higher proportion that feel that now than before the Tories lost power.
I mean, this is quite incredible to manage to actually outdo Rishi Sunak in the no, come on, we've had enough of this. Somebody else needs to have a shot and try anything. Up from 73% in 2024 now to 77% of people thinking there should be a new government.
Yeah, and then you see in that one answer, you see why reform's ahead. Because obviously, everyone had completely lost confidence in the Tories, so you ain't probably going back there again. And so where are you going if you're English? And that's the point where, I mean, this is the point where the possibly Jeremy Corbyn vehicle swings in as a bit of a disruptor. Maybe it's not likely to gather an awful lot of support, but the suggestion it could get up to 10%. This is the one, Zara Sultana, who's a pretty redoubtable MP who's backed Palestine and opposed welfare cuts and really put her head over the parapet. Looks like she kind of made her announcement that she was quitting the Labour Party a bit before all the ducks were in a row, because having had a good old Google today, I still haven't seen Jeremy Corbyn say, I am up for this. I don't know from your vantage if you've seen that.
Well, I mean, this has been doing the rounds in certain circles for months, and I can't quite remember now whether it was before Christmas, but certainly after Christmas, there's been this constant rumbling of the fact that Jeremy Corbyn was looking to set up a new party of some description.
Yeah.
And there were questions about whether it was going to have a Scottish branch or not have a Scottish branch. Were they going to be open to second referendum? Were they going to be pro-independence? Or were they just going to leave us alone? And of course, Corbyn has never got Scotland. Sarah Sultana, as you say, put out this tweet, and then the Times had an exclusive of various leaked WhatsApps from the kind of steering committee of this putative new party, trying to get her to take it back down. And that wasn't what they had agreed. She seemed to be frustrated and fed up with all the dithering and wanted to push things on a bit. But, it doesn't seem like a very well put together or cohesive plan as yet. It was something that was still in the rumblings. They obviously need Team Corbyn and the Momentum contact book to make it in any way viable. But she's kind of shot the bolt to try and push them on a bit.
Yeah. And I mean, because when you look at all the kind of analysis of it, it's all basically talking about Corbyn. I mean, I guess, we're full of identity politics in Scotland and Britain anyway. And probably people haven't got their heads around Zara's a relatively new figure for a lot of people. But it is kind of, it's a bit patronising in a way that it just does take, the whole focus is on him. And yeah, I've done it again. And yet that would be, I mean, apparently, I can't remember if it was Glastonbury or somewhere else. They've started the old Jeremy Corbyn lark again, so it's kind of, that's the appetite is for a real sort of troublemaker to get back in there who's going to, stick to his guns. Meanwhile, I mean, the Scottish end of this is quite interesting because there was a post. The first I noticed of this actually was a post that Mike Small from Bella Caledonia put up 3 days ago, which is saying that there's been a group called Collective Scotland already engaged with discussions towards a conference of progressives and socialists taking place on October the 4th in Glasgow, and then looking to build an electoral alliance of the Scottish left to run in the 2026 parliamentary elections, and after that, the local elections. And I do note one commentator has noticed that not only are these guys really mentioning and looking at local elections, but Reform are also looking there because, if they don't get breakthrough at the Scottish elections with STV in local elections in Scotland, they will probably get an innings. So he posted that, and then everyone who noticed it, started wellying in. I mean, quite a lot of independence people were there was no mention of independence It's just an autonomous party of Scotland's progressives and socialists, um, and kind of not just as a set of parties, but as a wider movement. So there's a lot of comments on here. I asked actually, does this collective group have a position on indie ref self-determination? And Mike replied, the group's still forming, so nothing set in stone, but I believe their position on independence is to support self-determination with the power to call and hold a referendum devolved to Holyrood. And quite a lot of people sort of saying, you see, that's not really going to be that great, because for a lot of the left, really getting out of the whole mess of the UK is the sort of solution. So I don't quite know where these guys are. I imagine that, the lefties within the SNP will obviously be pushing back at the notion that there's another group coming in from stage left. And finally, I mean, as one of the commentators on here mentions, that there was just exactly this, an electoral alliance called Rise, which came out of the radical, just I'm forgetting all the names of everything now.
The Radical Independence Campaign and
that's
the Scottish
exactly
Socialists.
it. Yeah. So those guys sort of amalgamated, bit of a party, bit of a movement in the case of Rick. They got no MSPs and it sort of disintegrated. And also, these guys haven't contacted the Scottish Socialists who are still on the go. So it looks like not that impressive. And it's yet another, somebody else sets up something that's kind of half already there. But very possibly, as you said, Zara Sultana has cleared the pitch for everybody, because everybody's having to kind of, suddenly come out of their from behind the shadows, if you like, before they were ready to do so.
It's also a kind of another escape route for traditional Labour supporters who probably would back independence if they were forced into it, but are still looking for yet another drop down to avoid having to make that sort of decision.
You mean they just want somebody to vote for, but not the SNP?
Not the SNP. Kind of indie curious, but my preference would be fixing the whole of Britain. And I thought we were going to fix the whole of Britain under the new Labour government. The new Labour government didn't do that, so I'm now looking for another fix the whole of Britain vehicle, rather than just realising that the UK is a busted flush as a state. It's practically bankrupt, and that there's no fixing it. There's certainly no possibility of default max or of some kind of move to federalism, because there's no appetite for that in England. And there's certainly a kind of appetite, I think, amongst some people in Scotland to kind of look out and see, any other opportunity beyond full independence, rather than just seizing the proper opportunities that are there with independence.
But then this puts the heat back on the SNP pretty big time, because there's, because there's not enough movement from them on independence to be satisfying their existing supporters. I mean, having travelled around the place a lot over the last week and just hearing people's opinions about things, I mean, I've met people who've left the party, for example, over Scottish Enterprise's decision to fund firms that supply arms to Israel, and Kate Forbes' defence of that. That has been like a surprising amount of last straw for people. And just then, the independence, every time you open any paper, you see more criticism of John Swinney, basically not foregrounding independence in a big, big way. And of course, there's also been an overturning of Tony, I'm never very sure about his surname. Say it.
Giuliano.
Oh, right. So just ignore all the G's and, okay, that's fine. So Tony Giuliano, who was kind of doofed for Falkirk West nomination with what eventually was found not to be a correct objection from someone that he'd harassed them at conference. So that's been kind of disproved. And that then leaves the choice looking extremely precarious. I mean, what's going to happen next there, do you think?
Well, I mean, I think this is a total mess. It seemed like a very obvious stitch up. Now, Tony Giuliano has people who very much like him and people who don't. He's a Marmite character. He's lost, of course, a couple of high-profile electoral contests, But he also looks like a politician. And I think they were slightly concerned that he was going to be selected for a third time. And it looks as if there were deliberate shenanigans to suspend him during the period of the nomination process and then allow his membership to be reinstated, which is just the kind of shenanigans that the SNP doesn't need. Tony Giuliano says that the SNP belongs to its membership, but I think this proves that it doesn't.
So what does happen next? Do they have to rerun that one?
Well, he certainly says that he's taking soundings. I suspect they're not going to rerun it. We really don't know what's going to happen next. There will probably be protests. There were protests by members of branches in that constituency during the period. People who'd already voted for him said that they were not happy to have their choice null and void and having to reselect a candidate that they didn't want to choose from. I think there may be pressure to rerun this election, but I think the SNP will probably resist that.
Well, the thing, it seems to me there's just like a lot of very unhappy people who are beginning to find a way to express some of that. I mean, I'm setting up this film at the moment, which will be now filming in August, because on August the 12th, all the community councils who met before in June, 53 community councils, just to refresh people's memories, in the Highlands, because of the wind farms that are now 1,300 applications in process in the Highlands. And their feeling is they are now the sacrifice zone for the whole of the UK, and particularly Southern England, to have the hardware that Southern England doesn't want to have to give it green energy via the subsea connector that runs from Peterhead to Yorkshire soon. In the meantime, though, there isn't a way to transmit a lot of that wind energy when it goes in across the border. So actually, many of the wind farms set up, which will be beside one another because the complaint locally is each application is being heard separately without respect to whether there's also a substation, also a battery farm, also digs for the guys who are building the whole things. All of that hardware and the massive conversion station near Beaulieu, all of that, they want us to hear that there's a strategy at work, because it feels like there isn't. And as mentioned before, there's a lot of anger, and it's all aimed at the Scottish government. I mean, it's the British government that's putting these targets in and almost requiring the Scottish government, I think it's argument, though I haven't spoken to anyone, I've spoken to plenty who have talked to these Highland MSPs who are SNP. Their response is that if they're legally bound, they've got a target for green energy, then they are legally bound to approve any plan that ticks the box. And that is just the end for a lot of folk in the Highlands. So the SNP and Labour didn't turn up to that big meeting of the community councils, 53 councils, representing 72,000 people, a third of the Highland population, nothing like it ever, ever, ever. So they've now regrouped and they're meeting on August the 12th. Now it would seem all the relevant MSPs are turning up, which is, a bit of a sign of the clout that this group is wielding. But they still want a pause on the wind farms and evidence of any kind of strategy. And all of that heat is being aimed at the Scottish Government and the SNP. If the SNP think they can duck this, walk away and whatever, they're so wrong. It's also the case, the Western Isles, I was there for the last week. The Western Isles are about to finally get, courtesy of SSE, a private company thanks to Thatcher. This is the way our infrastructure is decided, by a private company. Anyway, it has been lobbied for 20 years, probably longer, to put a subsea connector into the islands because they've got a lot of green energy. So they're finally doing it to the Western Isles, but the connector goes to Skye. Now, Skye is worried that since it now has a chunky big connector, there's hundreds of applications for wind farms going into Skye. And the Skianachs don't want hundreds of wind farms everywhere. But the Western Isles folk are worried that if there are loads of wind farms in Skye, that will be a constraint. I mean, like the grid will already be full going from them to the mainland of Skye power. So if they have even little community stations, and wind farms. And these are the ones that will fall out of the mix completely because they are almost nobody cares. The little bit of grid that's necessary for a community energy thing to feed into is not a priority. So the Western Isles guys are sort of dependent on what happens in the sky. The sky guys are pretty terrified of turning into what's already happened in the mainland Highlands. And all of them blame the SNP, right?
Oh, gosh.
And they're thinking of standing candidates in 2026. Now, I don't know if they are or they aren't. Everybody, it's an easy thing to say. It's a lot harder to get organised and do it. But I have never seen people so angry. So it's kind of like if you think you can run, but you can't hide. All these things are kind of coming home to roost a bit in different places. And I'm sure that, once people start to get the idea that if there are candidates standing in the Highlands, there's equally angry people in Bantshire, Murray, Angus, all the places that the pylons have gone. And the pylons are the British government, And yet, this is the way, if you don't get involved in the argument, and it doesn't look like you're kind of on the side of the people, and this goes right back to that survey, the question asked and highlighted in that polling is, does Keir Starmer respect people like me? Well, if you were now to ask that question, does the Scottish government, do the SNP respect people like me, and you're sitting in the Highlands? The answer is just no. Now that might not be, it's not fair completely. There's a lot to say, but the SNP have got to get in there and start doing something about this.
I mean, there's certainly no way you would want to be going into a Scottish election with this kind of head of steam of anger from across the whole of Scotland, from the Highlands in the energy situation through to the Central Belt with concerns over arms supply to Israel. Of course, last week there was also the vote to prescribe Palestine Action, which I think equally goes against the Labour Party. It looked like a complete overreach in regards to the activity that Palestine Action had taken against the RAF base. But the SNP seemed to root back from its
they abstained.
Its long-stated position and abstained.
Yeah, sorry, I thought you were going to go on to another thing in the long list.
Goodness, I mean, I could just absolutely beggars belief. And of course, the reason for abstaining was because the wily Labour government had craftily outfoxed them by putting on two mental groups that nobody had ever heard of into the same vote. So that was an all or nothing proposition. You're either voting to prescribe all three of these organisations or none of them. Well, they should have voted against it. It was up to the Labour Party and the Labour government to decide how these votes were taken. There was a very deliberate act on their part to lump them together. There was lots of huffing and puffing in the Commons. The SNP's vote was not going to prevent the proscription of those two other organisations. They were not going to carry the vote. It's not going to make a change one way or the other. Therefore, you have to stick to your principles and vote against it.
So, and I mean, just obviously what happens then is that things get worse and it sticks to you because, subsequent to that, there was a demonstration with a bunch, 29 people being arrested, one including the 83-year-old Reverend Sue Parfitt, game woman that she is, carrying a sign saying, "I oppose genocide, I support Palestine Action." So she was taken away wearing her dog collar, 83-year-old woman. That is now on you.
Yep,
obviously, it's much more on Labour, but, come on.
But that's what you're aligning yourself with. And that was the obvious problem that was going to be faced. And, by prescribing this, by trying to ban kneecap and then ending up having Bob Villain, the Labour Party are making the situation for themselves much worse. And they're attracting, vast amounts of quite understandable outrage against the situation in Gaza, which is really bubbling into the mainstream consciousness of everybody. And I think you've been speaking with
yes,
Mike Napier.
Mick Napier, who does the Palestine Solidarity Campaign. I mean, as all of this just got worse and worse and worse, and my mind blows now. Every morning you wake up and hear this casual statement that 55, Palestinians have been shot dead at a supposed age centre, 70, 55. It's almost like some sort of bingo calling thing. It's as if these incredible numbers don't seem to sort of matter because, hey, they're not the 400 a day you got through the bombings that are still happening. And I don't know if, those in political positions just think the public is numbed to that. And I don't know if they are. I'm not, certainly. And it's getting me more and more sort of angry and upset, as you can hear. I suspect many people feel the same. So anyway, the Palestinian Solidarity Campaign has called a rally on the 19th of July. And I spoke to Mick Napier. I should just say that he mentions that Ross Greer is signed up to speak. Turns out Ross Greer is actually also signed up to speak at the Pride rally in Glasgow the same day, same time. So it looks like he can't manage it. They're going to announce the speakers they've got. And I certainly hope that if anyone listening knows Humza Yousaf, or indeed is Humza Yousaf, you come, because your presence would make this a big demonstration. It's the only one, I think, happening in Britain, around the summer holidays, and it has to be big and make an impact. So anyway, here's Mick Napier. So Mick, tell us about the demonstration. Where's it going to be? When's it going to be? Is it going to be big?
It's going to be Saturday the 19th in Edinburgh. It's going to assemble just off Princes Street at the foot of the Mound at 1 o'clock. And there will be people coming from across Scotland. We need numbers on that day because not just in the 22nd month of genocide, but also there's a fresh wind blowing. There are a lot of people now prepared to move and to take action who it wasn't so obvious a few months ago.
And who have you got? I mean, if it's any use to anybody, I'm certainly ready to speak. But have you got Humza Yousaf, for example?
Well, we hope so. He's been approached from several different directions, and we're inviting Ross Greer from the Green Party. We're certainly inviting you, Leslie, to grace the platform, and I've invited Andrew Feinstein, South African veteran, ex-MP there, to come and help to raise the issue of how Scots can pressurise our government to come off the fence and endorse the case at the ICJ against Israel for genocide.
And just on that point, are there any other MSPs, like from the SNP, who are willing to back that case?
We sincerely hope so, but we haven't landed any fish yet. I mean, every time in the past we approached the SNP under Humza Yousaf and others, they've resisted a call to support the Palestinian call for BDS by asserting that they stand foursquare for international law. And I think now we have a perfect opportunity for them to make that concrete and to make a difference.
Can you just
because the ICJ is pretty serious.
Sorry to interrupt, but just because you're used to that acronym, but other people might not be. So the BDS?
Yes, it's a call from Palestinian civil society a year after they won a landmark case at the International Court. But nothing changed except that Britain increased its arms sales to Israel. And that call went out from really every molecule of Palestinian civil society, professional associations, every party, refugee camps, and so on, calling for people like you and me and your viewers not to wait for governments to act because they had failed to do so, but to take action themselves as trade unionists, as churches, as community groups, to boycott and isolate the apartheid state of Israel. And we've ratcheted up some successes over the years, but there's still obviously so much more to do.
Are you hopeful that SNP representatives will actually come on this march and maybe speak?
We very much hope so. We very much hope so, because 22nd month of genocide, it's not getting any worse. It's just that we don't want to spend too much time talking about it, but we're reaching new levels of depravity when individuals who are involved in the so-called humanitarian aid whistleblow and say that the mercenaries running it are deliberately executing large numbers of Palestinians. It's just a new depth of depravity, and we need people And people are beginning across the country and worldwide to realize they have to do something. This is not something you can sit on the fence with. So we very much hope that the SNP and some Labour worthies will take a stand and defy Starmer, because they're in a party whose leader has said that Israel has a right to deny water to the people of Gaza. And denying water is denying life. It's openly endorsing genocide. So we hope Labour Party members will come out and take a stand and join us on that day. And who knows, bring banners as well.
And I appreciate that the march is going to, well, actually, my mind skipped over where the end is, because I guess it's the march that's the business. But is it ending up at the Scotland office or where?
It's ending up at the UK office. What's the address again? I can't remember. Queen Elizabeth.
Well, it's
Queen
in
Elizabeth
at the
House.
back of the
Yeah.
Royal Mile, basically.
It's
Scotland,
the
Scotland office.
exactly so, exactly
Yeah.
so. It's Starmer's footprint in Scotland.
But I know from just speaking to a lot of people how aghast many people have been, and actually resigned their SNP membership over the recent announcement that Scottish Enterprise would still give backing to firms that are producing arms that are being sold and used in Israel.
We have to stay clean. In the future, people will look back on this and say that Scottish Enterprise donating money to arms companies who send their goods to Israel. There was a headline in one of the Scottish newspapers a few years ago: "Made in Scotland dropped on Gaza." That's private companies, but the Scottish government, over which we have some control or some influence, they need to be made to stop this complicity in the crime, because there will be a reckoning in the future, and the Genocide Convention makes it an imperative for every government to take whatever action it can to stop it. It's not happening at the moment.
Well done for getting this together, Mick. Just to leave this really the detail in people's minds, it's the 19th of July. It's gathering at the foot of the Mound in Edinburgh. It's marching through to the Scotland office, which is near the Royal Mile, and be there.
Exactly.
Great, and we'll have those dates and details on the Leslie Riddick website and also in the podcast show notes. I mean, you were mentioning Hamza Yusuf there. Obviously, he's been taking a really strong line on this, which I think chimes with the majority of our listeners, certainly, if not the majority of people across Scotland. And Hamza had called, and ahead of this vote for the proscription of Palestine Action, for the SNP Westminster group to vote against it. I did reach out to Hamza's team and Hamza on Thursday of last week to see if we could get a comment from them, but unfortunately nothing came back by reply.
Okay, well, who knows? But I mean, what do you think's happening with that? Because, there was a stage when Stephen Flynn, before the last election, when there was a fair number of SNP MPs, and, the SNP seemed to be the voice of practically everybody who wanted the Palestine-Gaza situation taken seriously. For it to sort of crumble into not even being able to oppose banning Palestine Action, it feels like something massive's happened, and yet Stephen's still the leader of the group.
I don't know what's happened. I've no insight into why the Westminster group did that. It certainly felt very much like a Westminster problem. You're in the Westminster bubble and you're being lent against heavily, saying, well, it would be unseemly for you to vote against these two radical and highly dangerous groups.
So there'd be a headline sort of SNP support?
Well, I mean, there were, who's going to care? But there were Telegraph articles and various other things criticising Diane Abbott and others for having voted against the proscription on the basis that these other two groups were included within it. But, does this bother us? It really shouldn't be bothering SNP MPs, and it would not have been the situation, I think, prior to the UK general election, when you had people like Tommy Sheppard, Phillipa Whitford, of course, who'd worked as a surgeon in Gaza, and Joanna who had visited there and had worked with Palestine, various Palestinian groups across the whole of the parliament. I mean, if you look at Hansard, both Pete Wishart and Brendan O'Hara have very little hinterland of speaking on Gaza issues prior to the October attack in 2023.
Right, so the kind of composition of the group that's left is different than it was, prior to that. But still, I mean, it does, of course, make you think that there was a stage where John Swinney, called for kneecap to be banned from, what was it, the Transmit Festival, I'm so not on with it all. Has that just happened, or is it
So
about to happen?
Transmit is about to happen, I think, and certainly the Kneecap are playing their own private gig, and there was various Police Scotland comments out this morning saying that they were going to have an effective policing operation across the whole of Glasgow, balancing all of these different types of gigs. But I mean, I was struck by, I don't know if you saw, there's a Leo Varadkar clip where he had basically the same type of question put to him as John Swinney. And immediately when I was watching the John Swinney clip, I thought, just say, who wants to live in the type of country where politicians tell you what music you can listen to and then go on to make statements around Gaza and take it and run with it? But of course, no, he very stoically answered and suggested that Kneecap should be banned, and just kind of fell in with that mainstream media line. Varadkar, by contrast, and I think it was Mary Lou MacDonald, took a far stronger line, and Varadkar says, terrorist legislation should be used against people who you think of as terrorists. And then he goes on and gives various examples, people who blow up chip shops and take action to hurt and maim people, not people who say untoward things at gigs.
Or spray anything with soluble red paint.
Exactly.
It's just, and the trouble with all of this is that you don't look far enough ahead to this. I mean, now it looks like the SNP is kind of constrained by that remark that John Swinney made about Kneecap. So you're on a sort of we are the law-abiding, party of the majority sort of lark at a time when most, there'll be some people who think that, no doubt. But, you're then setting yourself up on the same axis as Labour, which is not a place to be, and opposed to the majority of Scots who just think, this is ridiculous, and are ashamed, actually, of any involvement the Scottish government's got in supporting bombing of Israel. And, the thing is, on all sorts of fronts, the public are really organising themselves and other organisations. So, for example, the Beeb wouldn't air the film Gaza Doctors Under Attack. And it was shown, I don't know if you saw it before you went or not.
No.
But anyway, it was possibly just after you went. Channel 4 have filmed it. And, said that the documentary met partiality standards for them completely, when the BBC claimed that it didn't, or there was a perception of partiality. I mean, for crying in a bucket. There was a great feisty column actually written by Neil Mackay in the Herald, who said the film was amongst the most harrowing and horrifying ever aired on British television, yet our so-called national broadcaster chose to keep it from public sight. Instead, Channel 4 has assumed the mantle of national broadcaster. And that's true on this question and on most foreign stuff. And then, of course, as soon as you start watching Channel 4 and you realise how much more on it they are about the situation in Gaza, Palestine and Israel, you then start to doubt, if you don't already doubt the BBC coverage, you just start to doubt everything they're actually doing. Allied to which, there's a story running that Lisa Nandy, who's the Labour Culture Secretary, wanted to have BBC staff fired because they aired a separate documentary about Gaza narrated by the child of a Hamas official. So it just goes on and on and on, and the SNP is on the wrong side of all of this.
And completely didn't have to be. I mean, Brendan O'Hara has quite a good article, I think, in the National, explaining why he voted against it. I don't think the arguments stack up, but I mean, he makes all of the correct points about the suffragettes, about the kind of slip into totalitarianism, banning things that you don't like, and stifling legitimate protest and legitimate direct action, and that the Labour Party are really lowering the bar. I think we had also seen that a number of officials within the Home Office were very concerned about prescribing Palestine Action in this way, and that's what the SNP have aligned themselves to. I think if you're having to write an article trying to explain something that's unexplainable, you're in the wrong position, and you've lost immediately if you're having to try and explain it to the public. It doesn't make any sense. There's no real read across against what is supposed to be the SNP's stated policy, and it's left them in a mess.
just while we're at it, I mean, obviously Trump and Netanyahu are having talks in the United States on a ceasefire that will not probably solve much, even if that 60 days is agreed. But meanwhile, I notice that the latest on this is that the defense minister, called Israel Katz, has instructed the military to draw up plans to move 600,000 displaced Palestinians to the ruins of Rafah. And apparently, once inside, Palestinians would be barred from exiting the zone, which would be run by international organisations and secured by the IDF. And Katz envisages that the, quote, humanitarian city would eventually house the entire population of the Gaza Strip. You've got to be on the other side of this. I mean, The Guardian's pointing out that legal experts say this plan would violate international law. But what they're doing at the moment with their humanitarian stuff violates humanitarian law, and nobody's doing anything. So anyway, everybody, 19th of July, foot of the mound in Edinburgh. I'm certainly going to be there and get as many people as possible. I know it's smack bang in the middle of the holidays, so fair play. But if you're here, can you get there? Because the size of the rally really will matter.
Yeah, and Mick, of course, also in that clip talked about the BDS, the potential for boycotts. You might remember before the last Parliament, Michael Gove was trying to push through legislation preventing public bodies from taking that type of action. That was already proven to be lawful for councils, for example, to refuse to procure goods from the occupied territories in Gaza. And that legislation fell because of the election, and the SNP had taken a principled stance against that all the way through. But, you know, in the public's mind, I think at the moment, certainly latterly, from having a very strong and principled opposition to the genocide in Gaza, we've seen, you know, quite a significant slide in recent weeks.
Mm-hmm. Right. Horse on, Macduff.
Indeed, indeed. Now, back to all things domestic. You have been away in the Far Isles at a conference. We were promised an update from that from the last podcast. So how have things been going at the North Atlantic States Conference?
Well, it was grand. I mean, it was brilliant. Actually, to be honest, the people who were the most impressive, perhaps, were the Greenlanders. I've never met so many Greenlanders at anything before. And it was a huge, huge coup by John Randall of the Islands Book Trust on the Western Isles for managing to persuade NORA, which is the acronym for the North Atlantic Lot, to come to the Western Isles. NORA is a branch of the Nordic Council. It deals with the wee states of the North Atlantic. And it's the first time it's ever come to Scotland in about 25 to 30 years. So that's really significant because it means they start to see the Scottish Islands as part of their sort of domain. And, you know, the guy who was organising it, Ernst, I mean, he then spent 2 or 3 days extra going down the islands to really get a feel for, you know, the islands and what they were about. You'd have to say there were times when I felt I was biting the carpet because people would stand up and speak about the not inconsiderable problems they've got. You've got to say the Greenlanders are a bouncy bunch, given that, you know, Trump is on one shoulder and China's on the other. I sat beside a big Greenlander chap and was asking him about why the Greenlanders haven't got into the rare earth minerals to try to stop China basically ponying in, and thus the Americans, you know, trying to come in. That's a large part of the reason that America's interested. And if, you know, you'd think if the Greenlanders could kind of get in, nationalize this, take the lead, find investment in their own right, they would basically manage to keep these big guys out. Actually, the explanation was quite interesting because there's about 15. It's not the same as just extracting something like iron ore. There's 15 ingredients to the rare earth minerals, and they're not pocketed in just as convenient. Once you've got a seam you can horse in, it's really easy. The Chinese, because they have the bulk of this supply in the world, have become very good at exploiting it. So that part of the reason that they're sort of hovering about is because they may have the only skills and technology at the moment to be able to make a go of it financially. So they're kind of very alert to what's going on, and very bright, interesting people, actually, with still that thing that people associate with Greenlanders of a sort of a slight otherworldliness actually that comes from living lives that are, unbelievably isolated and still very dependent on hunting and so on. But they've got a very good sort of sense of themselves, and their argument about independence is not if, but when. So there's nobody on that delegation that didn't want independence. They have the ability to pull down different responsibilities from Denmark when they want to and when they've got the economic clout to fund it themselves, same as the Faroes. So that's the way both those wee places are, in the case of Greenland, massive physical place, but small population. That's how they can get their way to independence, because they can go when they want, but they need to be economically independent first, which is not a bad way to focus minds, actually. So it was quite refreshing speaking to them all. And just by the by, final thing to say, the number of times when when you're speaking to people from Norway or Iceland or the Faroes, you had to explain feudal land ownership because they just couldn't, it's not such a problem because happily most of Lewis is now covered, the whole of the Western Isles is covered by community land buyouts. But, the rest of Scotland is still struggling with this grip on the ownership of land, which none of these places experience. And the other massive, massive thing is the lack of local control. And that would be true even for the Western Isles. I think, I may get this wrong, but I think the population is about 22 to 26,000. That would still be by far the biggest council in any of these areas because their councils are, about 1,000 or 2,000 in size. So, I find myself having to explain that first to everybody, including the Scots. So I think also when we're coming back to the business about the upset there is in the Highlands at the moment, it's also about lack of local control because they're sitting in the Highland in a council that is almost the same size as Belgium. And so each of these community councils in any other country would be an actual council that was able to effect a veto on planning because it would control planning. So, this is, I think there's a multi kind of thing going on there, but at least the Nordics were like, as usual, a total breath of fresh air. And I should say, I went down the islands then and went down to South Uist. And just to say that there is actually some great things happening. There's one project, my Gaelic will fail me badly here, but Knock Solar, which is basically a place in South Uist at Dalborough where all primary school teachers will come to get an orientation about Gaelic, the islands, and rural Scotland, which is a brilliant idea. The name it means Bright Hill in Gaelic, and it'll also be playing in music, culture, the whole of the Gaelic sort of side of life, if you like. And I think it was inspired, it's partly run by Keolis, which is a brilliant festival in South Uist that celebrates the links between the Southern Islands, particularly, and Cape Breton, Newfoundland, and the Gaelic that's still spoken across all those places, and the music that actually is very similar, the step dancing, all of it. Keolis as a festival is absolutely brilliant and all conducted in Gaelic. So what they're doing here is a tremendous, tremendous thing with UHI, which is to have a place that allows all new graduating teachers to sort of get a feel for the country they're teaching their children about, which is just totally brilliant, and it's aimed at pupils as well.
This is fantastic news, and it plays in quite nicely into the podcast special we have about Scotland's culture.
Indeed, which will be coming up for next week, actually, when you are definitely stuck beside a pool, my dear.
Well, the jury's still out on that. I do get back at 2:00 in the morning on the Monday, so I think I should good to go.
No. Because this is the point, no. I'm really going to put my foot down here.
We will arm wrestle about that.
Well, because I'm currently sort of trying to book speakers in Finland. Now, the way Finland operates, and this is part of the reason that it is the world's happiest country for 7 years running, is that these guys, they go on holiday on June the 23rd, all of them, right? And then they come back roughly on August the 21st. And actually having been in cycling around the Åland Islands, which are part of Finland, it's astonishing how the ferry timetable collapses on the date that's agreed for everyone to come back. So, of course, in Scotland, there's what's laughingly called the shoulder months, where actually things collapse quite considerably as well. But it seems kind of early. But the point is, these guys all go on holiday at the same time, and there is no point trying to contact anyone. They're just not there. It's a bit like, we have the trades fortnight when you might, the trades
Yeah.
did that so that basically all of them went together so that they would synchronize and there wouldn't be this difficulty of trying to do big jobs with one of the trades missing. But these guys do this for months for everybody. And it just, it is such a relief because they take their time off. I'm winding my way back to this, Fraser. They take their time off like sacrosanct. And actually, Gavin, that I'm making the film with, was telling me that he got called in when he was found working at the weekend once, given a slight telling off, and then a day off in lieu and extra pay.
Wow. Stuff your
Yes.
Anglo-Saxonism. I do like, because of course there's all these apocryphal stories of the out of office emails. I'm on my summer holidays at the moment. Any emails received during this period will be automatically deleted and will not be read.
Yes, but it's a completely
coming
different
back from
sort
a
of.
2 week break to 125 emails you've got to wade through and try and work out whether any of them are still relevant or not.
I know, and the thing is, everybody's trying to pretend. Well, I mean, personally speaking, I am here the whole blooming time. I was trying to set up a lot of these films, kind of wandering around through bits of reception in the Western Isles and getting so stressed into the bargain, and then thinking, why am I doing this? But anyway, it has to be done. So
And
I should
speaking
say
of,
the crowdfunder is still there. If anybody could chuck in, it will help us. I think we're almost there actually with the money for Finland. So just enormous thanks to everyone who's donated. The bit that would come now would help us to do this film in Scotland. And it's very principally to pay the young mother of three, Katie, who does the filming and editing. That is a long job, those things, and the travel up north and so on. So really the bit of the crowdfunder now is to be able to fund that film about Scotland and try to, unravel what's happening about the energy mess that's being created.
yeah, it's currently at 65%, so getting very close to target with 24 days left to go. And I was thinking about the Estonia film, particularly recently, with all this hoo-ha about the Scottish Government or the Scottish NHS's digital front door. Wes Streeting had described John Swinney as a analog politician in a digital world, and we still seem to be pretty far away from getting release of the NHS digital front door for Scotland, despite the fact that Wales has had theirs since 2023, and I think the English one has been working since 2018, which allows you to view and book appointments. And the slow rollout of the app in Scotland is only going to initially be for a kind of pilot group and for just one service, dermatology. It's quite difficult to unpick exactly what's going on. It certainly seems to be that this NHS Scotland app will go much further than the NHS England app when it's finally up and running and working, and because it will integrate both health and social care. But, as somebody that doesn't really have much interaction with the health service, everybody in my household has received, in the last 2 years, at least one per person, a letter from the NHS saying you didn't come to your appointment, but not a letter saying please come to your appointment, or a letter saying here's your appointment, but the appointment's already passed. So
Well,
these are the kind of things that any normal functioning company would have sorted decades ago in terms of sending you email notification when things were happening, but the NHS still requiring you to have a brown envelope posted out.
Yeah. Well, as someone who does have quite a sort of interaction with the NHS, it's that letter stuff is quite mind-blowing actually, because then you also have to have someone sitting at the end of a phone to deal with all the people who phone up and have to change their appointment. So that, I mean, okay, they probably sort of think, well, we probably get about a third of them, they'll just knuckle down. You don't know within that third how many people just haven't really paid attention to it and won't turn up. You haven't got a reminder system with it. Anything else, you get texts and stuff. even for a blooming car service. You get a text or something reminding you it's tomorrow. And to be fair, my GP practice, I think, is the best I've ever come across. So they do have things like that, but it's very much them. But when you come back to the hospital sort of system, it just beggars belief that we're still on letters. And then when you finally phone the person and change the date, they say, we'll send another letter out. And I mean, I've tried to say, can we just not do that? Because, I mean, okay, you're meant to come to the hospital clutching your letter, hand it to the receptionist, but quite often they just say date of birth when you turn up. They find you on the system for your date of birth, and you're still holding your sacred bit of paper. So for sure, this is all crazy. I mean, I'm just seeing actually, though, another sort of story that's doing the rounds about Ian Blackford kind of calling for a sort of bold economic plan from the SNP, and he's making some points about how bad the risk is about UK debt at the moment. I mean, as a former investment banker, he would know, and he's saying that the current gilt yield on 10-year UK government gilts is 4.5%. In Germany, 2.6%. In Sweden, 0.4%. Even Ireland, that was seen as a basket case, 2.8%. So basically, that's the market saying the UK is kind of pretty much dodgier, twice as dodgy as all these other places to invest. And he's saying, we made vote jokes about Liz Truss, but basically we're still on that kind of catastrophic failure. And I've got to say, reading through this, and of course this is not, this is exactly where you need to make the case for independence. He does actually get there. And of course, I'm not sure in his own ordering of his comments which came first. But that has got to be 100% the case, the argument for independence. Of course, you then need something that you're setting out yourself. But when it comes back to, what will work, community energy, why not, for example, require the grid as part of your okaying planning stuff, require the grid to make space for community energy, or even require projects before they get planning approval to have a certain proportion of it actually owned by the community. If you wanted to really make some big changes economically, it's not just calling the Cromarty Firth or, whatever, a kind of green free port and then watching businesses move from one place to another. So there's just a kind of churn. You could be really changing the profile and starting to keep, the extractive stuff that everyone's watching. You could be keeping money here. And we need to see some sharp thinking like that, which, let's face it, Shetland Isles Council did back in the day when it managed to set up its own oil fund through sharp, quick thinking about that. Could otherwise have just gone, oh, well, we'll get some jobs at Sullomvo. It sort of said, yeah, we'll get some jobs and we'll get some blooming money. And they used it to create all the infrastructure, the ferries, the sports centres in every wee island. Come on, this needs to be the kind of verve that we need to see from the SNP now. Otherwise, you do just start to kind of, there's a weariness about the support which will get eaten into by others.
Yeah, I think particularly we need to see the business case. If we had a full range of tax and incentivising powers, you would not only be approving these large-scale energy producing units, offshore or onshore wind, but incentivising people to move businesses or start businesses close to these so that you had the offtake as well as the input. It's all about how we actually move the economy, how you incentivise people, and how we bring down the cost of industrial electricity. There's a huge opportunity, but it's not something that can be seized within the current powers of the Scottish Government.
And I found myself on Question Time after the blooming sting in the throat by the wasp, which meant I ended up in A&E with a guy. I can't remember when this happened. I don't know if we've talked about the wasp.
We've talked about the wasp.
Of course we did.
We did.
So the wasp has been dealt with. Anyway, so when you think about the amount of money that could come in, and this is the point, because we're sitting here robbing Peter to pay Paul, with people not expecting anything anymore in terms of, oh, well, it's all so expensive and we can't do that because that's expensive, and we can't put an IT system into the NHS which will basically revolutionise things because that's expensive. And we can't pay care workers better because that's expensive. And the point is, if you have independence and control of your energy resources, you have money to spend on all of these things. And I know everybody is scared of this now because that's like the Jeremy Corbyn loads of money stuff, and the right-wing press horse in and go, oh, the magic money tree, which everyone listening will realise has been rattled by every austerity-producing government since. But the point is, we would have that real income. We would be canny with it like the Norwegians. They're only using the interest from their oil fund, not the oil fund itself. But we can be canny with that and start to expand the amount of money that is put into public services. And that's what, the whole of Scotland is crying out for.
And you've been talking about public services in Dundee, a food project in Dundee that was having a credit claimed for by the UK government.
Yes, well, I'm not quite sure who's claimed the credit or not, but as soon as I saw the story, it's quite high in the National at the moment. And it's got details of grants given actually by UKRI, which is the UK Research Something Institute. So it's, of course, which is probably funded by the UK government. But it's them that's decided to fund various projects that are trying to look at food security. And the one that's in Dundee is an idea by a brilliant guy called Pete Ritchie, who runs a group called Nourish Scotland, which is all about trying to improve the cost of food and the availability of it. And one of Pete's ideas has been to have what they call diners. They were actually taking this as an idea from the Hungry 30s in the States when states were subsidizing diners because people just didn't have enough money to eat. Now, obviously, with food banks, we're already there with the sort of raw supply of materials, if you like. But we're losing the companionship, the crack. A lot of people haven't got money to heat food, so they're not eating hot food. And that's what the diner idea is trying to put in. And the key point, and Pete was just on the phone to me before we started this podcast, the key point he wants to get over, which is not being picked up, I think, in the National article, is that it's universal. It's not trying to make this a sort of, diner for poor people. It's meant to be, in the States, it's like big, long tables, really affordable, very nutritious food, mostly coming from around the local area. So the food sourcing is an important point as well. And it does totally change the experience of dining like that. It brings people together in ways where they can also access anything else they need, but actually meet one another because we're all living in ghettos. So, far from this being, I think the implication with the headline is that this is some sort of, evil attempt by the UK government to slide some kind of, one of their bits of cash into Dundee or something like that. This is totally not it. It's a very good thing, a brilliant idea, the first perhaps of many, and all part of their elbows.
Sounds fantastic. I think we've seen some really good community food projects springing up across the whole of Scotland. Lots of community growing expansion and community sharing of knowledge and allotments, and then feeding that into, as you say, more collective type experiences where people actually get together, meet their neighbours, eat good quality locally grown food and have a bit of crack and a bit of fun.
And this might be stretching things somewhat, but I mean, this is actually like an idea that's coming into New York City, courtesy of, if he gets elected, a very surprising nominee for the Democrats. I wrote a column about it last week, who is Zoran Kwame Mamdani. Now I have to keep looking at that name because it doesn't spring right off my tongue. And it's absolutely extraordinary that this guy got the Democratic nomination. I mean, he was born in Kampala, Uganda. So, I mean, that's courting more stick even than Barack Obama, who, the Republicans still seem to think wasn't actually born in America. He was. Kamala Harris, she was born in California. But, this guy was not even born in America. He was naturalized in 2018. And, he's a housing counsellor. He's a hip hop musician, which channels a wee bit of kneecap into the equation. And he has slowly built up his platform. This is his platform to freeze rent, provide free public transport, free childcare, council-owned affordable grocery stores, 200,000 more council flats, a $30 an hour minimum wage, and all funded by extra taxes on the wealthy. Right. He was, that's quite, whoa, that is, now there's your, any of the left groups organising here would say, yep, there's a platform for you. Bernie Sanders, who was the left-wing presidential candidate last time, has endorsed him, but still nobody expected he would win the Democratic nomination because the rest of them were giving him pelters. And yet after the vote, he won. He won the Democratic nomination. The actual vote for mayor is in November. But looking at the maths, he apparently motivated 37,000 new voters to register. And the largest block voting last week were 18 to 24-year-olds, which is completely unprecedented. And he's taking Trump on absolutely head on because he's pledged to stop masked immigration and customs enforcement agents, that's ICE, from deporting our neighbours. And basically, Trump looks like he's coming for him, because on the wake of the win, Trump has called Mamdani a communist lunatic. Well, okay, I think you just take that as a compliment from sort of here on in. But he's basically saying that he would investigate his naturalization procedure if there's a problem about it. And there's plenty of his supporters.
And if there's not, we'll find one.
Yeah, exactly. One particular guy is a Republican representative of Tennessee called Andy Ogles. I'm not making this up. And he's called for that citizenship to be revoked because he concealed support for terrorism during the process. And the evidence he's citing is a rap song that Mamdani sang, dear knows how long ago, entitled My Love to the Holy Land 5, in which he calls members of a foundation convicted of supporting Hamas, I hope you're all still with this, folks, my guys. To be fair, Mamdani has also refused to condemn the phrase globalize the intifada. And he has. I mean, there's a long, if you look at the kind of the commentators in the States, there's huge debate now about all of this. For Palestinians, they're saying just resists the Israeli illegal occupation, actually, of most of their land and stop crushing the life out of Gaza. For Jews and Israelis, that looks like authorizing a kind of, putsch across the ages and across the world. So it's a dodgier thing to have to justify than anything else anyone is currently dealing with. But he's still standing by that. He's also had pelters because there's video of him eating with rice with his hands in an old video. This is the kind of rubbish these guys are coming out with. And, Republicans saying civilized people don't eat with their hands and so on. There's a great backlash because the younger folk who are using social media are straight back in there asking this guy, how do you eat tacos, French fries and burgers then?
Yeah.
So in a sense, he's kind of bringing a lot of things to a head, because he's like a lightning rod, actually, for the rage of the alt-right. I mean, let's be honest, in his own party as well. And, the optimistic bit, which might be a bit blooming happy-clappy, is that he could draw some of that poison from the body politic, perhaps, but he's certainly showing old, tired establishment, nominally left parties how to win again. And that's, I'm not drawing direct parallels, but that's so relevant here because, the rest of the Democratic Party has not known what to do with Trump. This guy does. So watch that name, Zoran Kwame Mamdani.
Fantastic stuff. And I think the thing is that he's not tuning himself. He's not ruing back from statements. He's standing clear on his principles and he's keeping on going. Call me a communist if you like. It's like, yes, I'm a socialist, which is a kind of dirty word in America. He's just eating it up and putting out his own point of view. And I think we should be seeing more of that here. And certainly that idea of getting people who were unside voters that we talked about last week about the potential for reform if they had any kind of ground campaign to get people who are not traditionally voters and have not gone out to vote for the last 2 or 3 elections or IFAR. That was one of the great successes that Rick had during the 2014 referendum, was signing up people and registering them. People had been off the electoral register since the poll tax, and getting them back and bringing them out to vote. There's a huge potential for 2026 to do similar things again on the left rather than on the right, and combat reform in that way.
But this is, it's just, again, if this was not already crystal clear, a warning to the SNP. The left never goes away and is regrouping. You can try and keep them outside the camp. You can try and not select them. You can try and do what you like. But at the moment, people are getting to the stage now, even with electoral systems that don't favour small parties, and with the difficulties small parties have faced to date, people are beginning to think of how to stand. So, liven your act up, big style. You've not got much time left now for that.
Great stuff. Well, I think that's all we have time for this week. The Culture Special will go out to subscribers later this week, and potentially to non-subscribers next week, depending on whether I manage to get back in time or not. And if you'd like to subscribe, you can go on to the Leslie Riddoch website at leslieriddoch.com/podcast and find out all the details of how to donate to support the pod. And the link to the Finland film crowdfunder will go up in the show notes, and it's almost at the target. It's looking as if we're going to have a fantastic Finland film to complement the other series of films looking at the different Nordic countries, with the potential of a stretch target to look at the Scottish.
No, it's encased within that target. It is just the target of 8,000 is 5,000 for the Finland film, which we've got now. So we are doing it. That's great. Thank you very much. The extra bit, the 3,000, is to be able to do that film about the energy problems in the Highlands. So what's contributed now, sort of, will go to that. So that's kind of where we are. And if we don't reach it, I'll pay Katie. So it's going to happen, that film, whichever way it gets.
Definitely
gets there.
Absolutely, now more than ever. And on that upbeat note, we'll see you next week, chums.